Hello and welcome to the second Rig Rundown live stream. The first one was with Chris Mayer of Learning Modular. Maya, sorry Chris, I know you're in the chat room and you told me to stop saying your name wrong last week. I'm useless. With Chris Mayer of Learning Modular, go check out that on my YouTube channel if you haven't. After this live stream, I will mention it again at the end. For this second Rig Rundown, I've got Nathan Moody, who is Noise Jockey. How's it going?
It's going very well, man. How are you doing?
Yeah, really good. Had the pleasure of really digging into your material recently, and the new Redbox release as well, which we'll get onto. Really cool. And I love this idea you have of smaller systems. You know, this is the instrument, this is the album, this is what I'm working on. So for anyone that hasn't seen me blab about this online and has just caught this off YouTube, the idea of a rig rundown is to talk with an artist, the performer. I've done these live with performers straight after they've played, up onto stage, quick interview. What are you using? What were your intentions? How are you patching? What's the kind of goal of the system? And recently just thought it would be a good idea to do that in more detail, talking about setup, patching, patch tips, sound, module choices, making decisions about keeping it in a small system or taking a whole system out. And as Nathan's got multiple releases focused around each system, you're the perfect candidate for episode number 2.
Perfect specimen.
Yeah. So I guess kind of pre-modular and leading into modular, just briefly, I don't like to go into too much of people's history here. I think there's other formats I could explore that in. But what's your kind of background in terms of audio, music, sound design?
So I've been doing music since I was a kid. Started on saxophone, then started playing guitar, got into piano. And for years, I wound up blogging about sound design and field recording at noisejockey.net. And I started getting into hardware in order to make cooler, more interesting sounds. This is during a period where I kind of dropped music for a while. And my friend Tim Preble was someone I reached out to saying, hey, you know, all these synth boxes and noise boxes I'm getting, the people who are making these are musicians themselves. And I want to do an article about that. And he said, oh, we should talk to Richard Devine. So I'm like, all right, just email Richard Devine cold one day. And that was the first time I heard, you know, the words, you know, Livewire and Harvestman and Make Noise. And so that was my first contact really with eurorack. My first modular I ever laid eyes on was a friend Serge in the early 90s. But when I wound up getting into modular, it was because I was looking for those timbres that I couldn't get out of fixed architecture synths. You know, like the Sequential Circuits Pro 1, which is one of my absolute favorite synths of all time. It kind of does a few things and does them incredibly well, but it's not super flexible. So so that's kind of where I got my start.
Yeah, cool. I should give a quick shout out to, and I'll screen share this, pull it up, the chat room. Anyone that's watching live or that's now watching this is going to sit straight on YouTube, give Google 20 minutes or so to process the video. It will stay on my channel. The chat room for this first episode was great. There's already some questions in there, and a little bit of kind of banter back and forth with people. Anyone watching live, just start piling questions in, and we'll try and answer everything. It's a fairly free-flowing, casual conversation. I should say, pull up a couple of bits about you as well. The blog you've mentioned over at Noise Jockey, someone did just say, I guess I need to go Google who you guys are, which is fine. You'll find everything about me on the YouTube channel. I'm really rubbish at keeping a website. I get so consumed and busy with work that I tend to not keep up with it. But yeah, so first kind of referring to modular then, obviously you said these names, Make Noise, Livewire, Harvestman. How long did it take you to dive into, well, I guess out of curiosity at first, getting a system for yourself and then realizing this is really what the kind of path you wanted to go down?
It took a while. I think that that first contact with Richard and Tim was probably 2010, 2011. And the article you're showing on screen right now actually is where I really started cutting my teeth on modular thinking, which is reason, and
Yeah.
reactor. And I'm also a professional interface designer. So the whole idea of the physicality that comes along with knobs, and it's called embodied cognition, where, you know, like if I play Scrabble with regular tiles, my scores are killer. And if I play Scrabble on my phone, I'm horrible. So you think differently when you use your hands in your different senses. And so, you know, my first rig was this tiny little, you know, I think I started with like 3U, and it was basically, you know, a braids, a Rene, and a handful of other things. And what shocked me about the possibilities was, especially with the Rene, the non-linearity of sequencing. I had never had a tool that really allowed for that before. And so that was kind of where I really started experimenting. And my first several albums, you know, in the last several years, have featured a mix of virtual and acoustic and found sounds and modular. And I find that, like, over time, just the modular mindset to me just makes me much more prolific, makes me more excited, and makes me, I think, maybe make better music. I don't know. I'm not the judge of that. So
Yeah. I remember, kind of sidestepping, but you mentioned braids early on. Man, I remember that coming out. It was a summer when I was in Berlin, and then about a week later over in the States. And I was hounding everyone at Schneider's Lad, and it was such a walk out from where we were. And I was with my partner at the time, who couldn't care less for walking an hour and a half or jumping on a couple of trams to a synth shop. And I kind of pestered my way into checking in. They'd not come in stock. You know, each time I went in, it was, yeah, come tomorrow, maybe. We're waiting and we don't know. Didn't happen. I remember emailing Sean at Analog Haven saying, can you hold one? And he was like, I can't hold stock. You can order one. And me being cheeky kind of said, no, I want to pay in US dollars. It'll be cheaper. If I do it now, I'm going to get charged more on my credit card. And he must have thought I was so dodgy. Just keep hold of the braids, but I don't want to pay for it. I'll do it when I get there. You've never met me before. I've never bought anything. And he did. Sean at Analog Haven did keep one aside, and ended up going and meeting him, and you know, ultimately the kind of good shopkeeper mentality. I then spent more money when I was in there and bought more than just braids. And but yeah, I remember the kind of excitement of that coming out. Yeah, the modular making better music thing, I don't know. For just you or for anyone in general. I guess when you're happy and your working methods excite you, I think, yeah, probably. That's not to say if modular would make everyone make better music. Maybe picking up the right guitar for the right job would excite someone more if they reach for a Les Paul instead of a Telecaster in the studio. But I think, yeah, the tools can pull out better performances and maybe a bit more imagination in patching or sound design.
yeah, absolutely. And all, you know, even if you're a carpenter, you know, the tools change the form of what you make. And, you know, if I strap on a Telecaster or a Strat, you know, I'm always having to turn 90 degrees to reduce the hum, you know, and I feel like I'm a little, you know, I have to like pose in a certain way. Whereas when I'm a Les Paul guy. So I just like grab the Les Paul and I'm just like instantly into it. And there's, for me, less to think about. And so with modular, I think, you know, my exposure to music made with modular as well made me really, I think, for the first time, realize that the timbral evolution of a piece can be just as interesting as the melodic evolution of a piece. And that's for people like Alessandro Cortini, like that's their bread and butter. You know, it's like, let's make this one thing that's super groovy. We're going to loop that for the length of the whole song. And then we're just going to timbrally shift over time. And I find that very hypnotic and very appealing.
Yeah. What's amazing with that stuff, like Alessandro's Cortini stuff, Mark Zeno that's in the chat, hey Mark, Mark's great, always comes in, fires questions at everyone. I have some really good conversations with Mark. I'm sure we'll feature on a show soon as well. Some of Mark's stuff as well is almost quite major in harmony, which can be a little cheesy sometimes done on synths, but the way that Cortini and other guys are really working this stuff tonally, I think it becomes such an interesting and almost aggressive in terms of note choice. Some of your music as well, I think, is almost quite major in tonality, which, you know, it's kind of easier to write in a minor key, or at least most of my friends that make electronic music find it easier. But these tonal shifts, and note choice as well within the given key, but these tonal shifts seem to really push things. I mean, it's that kind of trance-like state thing, as you said, with the repetition.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've definitely been known to say like, oh yes, this was composed in E minor, but of course it's G major too. So
yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah. That's the majority of my week, teaching music in college in a couple of schools that just keys and ways of making things feel a certain way with note choice. Another great one I should shout out where we talked about keys and modular, Tone Science by Ian Boddy. For anyone watching, or you if you've not checked it out, Nathan. Each piece is composing a given key, you know, setting a quantizer to F sharp harmonic minor, but there's lots of random, it's all generative, but always driven into this home key and kept in tune. And they're really interesting pieces for it. I'll pull some questions in because the chat's kind of so active, I'll lose these if we wait until we get onto this in terms of topic. Tom's asked, when recording, do you find a limiter or compressor is necessary when dealing with the dynamic range of modular signals? I'll let you go first, Nathan, and then I'll share some thoughts on that.
Yeah. Well, I think it depends more on arrangement than the instrument. Certainly, if anyone's like me, you know, like you want to crank that bass and just make it be crazy and explore, you know, some more extreme territory. But I'm also of the of the age where I remember when composition, arrangement, mixing, recording, mixing, and mastering were all separate steps. So when I perform live, everything's going through a pretty aggressive compressor just in case. Okay. I should apologize to Austin and Ron Miller for, I think, damaging their hearing at Robot Speak once with a kick drum, which is not a point of pride. That was actually really bad. But when I record at home, we're all recording in 24-bit these days. I give myself tons and tons of headroom. So that way, if I'm, you know, and I record live jams all the time in the studio, and I just give myself enough headroom and then lay the tracks out, let them kind of sit, not listening to them for a while. And when I come back, then I do a proper actual mastering pass, or have someone else do a mastering pass. And then I find that, you know, there's always like the infrasonic, you know, 20 to 30 hertz that I often need to high pass to clean it up and tighten it up a little bit. So I do find that the music I make typically benefits from a compressor and limiter, but that's based on how I arrange. And I tend to do that later on as opposed to doing it in the moment unless I perform live.
Yeah.
What's your take on that, Ben?
Well, the one thing I'd like to touch on, you mentioned, I'm very much that mindset of writing and producing and mixing and mastering are entirely different processes, and I don't think you should, to me, waste time consuming, you know, thinking about the mastering at the end of the process, or even really worrying about mixing. I find getting ideas out when inspiration strikes the most important thing. So I think having workflow where you can just get an idea down, you know, things are pre-patched up using a patch bay or whatever sound card and system you've got. You know, we all probably mix to some extent as we go if we're multi-tracking or layering things or recording live instruments. But yeah, I'm very much that mindset. I don't really think modular needs much limiting and compression. Tom, if you mean in a specific, this is Tom in the chat room, a specific context, feel free to add the comment. I'm watching the chat box, so I'll catch it. I don't think so. My recording chain is, you know, an oscillator straight into sound card. I'm aware of what level that sits at. I'm fortunate enough to have enough inputs that I just leave them patched in. I'm not then plugging a guitar in or a DI box or something else on that channel any other day. And no, I don't think so. I think, you know, it's a huge potential range in terms of the voltages this stuff works at, way beyond line. But most patches, they're not spanning such a huge dynamic range. It's not a bass guitar that really does need compressing.
Yeah, and I should qualify when I say compressing and limiting, like it's a really rare day when I'm doing more than -1, -2 dB on either. So like I'm not trying to, I never find, like you're saying, that my dynamic range is, you know, so vast that I need to, really crunch it to make it sound compelling. But Ben, you touched on something that we should probably circle back to throughout today's talk, which is the idea of immediacy, and just not letting those worries farther down the line get in the way of just getting the stuff out when the inspiration strikes. I think that is super critical.
Yeah. I mean, I, unlike a lot of people that have this stuff on, either because they like watching the lights or they leave it on, I do turn everything off most of the time, but I'm a few switches away from go. If I've got headphones on this, I'm on the console I'm a power switch away. It's going to flick in, default to my default sound. Logic that I use to record will just take it. I'm less than a minute away from being able to record, and I think that's really important. Or even just having a hard disk recorder or something like a portable Tascam or Zoom next to the mixer or modular. I do think that's really important. Absolutely. And also, I remember having a conversation with Chris Randall about this. Someone asking, should I be looking at processing this stuff through my API 500 series Lunchbox? And we were just saying that to actually get this down to a level that wants to work at, you're going to have to drop so much gain off the modular to then bring it back up with the API stuff, whatever you've got in your Lunchbox setup, that maybe it's not really that worth it. I mean, unless it's someone like, say, Surachai, who is just abusing compression as an effect, which is glorious, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm like you. Compression is... I really like kind of 1-to-1 or 1-2-to-1 ratio, and then a really low threshold. So catch everything, but just T to that kind of 1 dB, 2 dB. Just let that just slowly dance around. The attack's quite open.
Yeah, sounds like a very similar approach to me as well. Yeah. It's
only when, mainly with drums, like parallel mixing drums, in the system, I use the Mutant Hot Glue from Hex Inverter. I'll pull an image of that one up for anyone that's not found. It's great, not just for drums. And I'll slam stuff through that, but it's got the blend control, so I can parallel the distortion, I can parallel the compression. That's a really nice, it's a little bit big, and I'm sure people in the chat will be thinking this. Friends often say, it's 4 channels, well 5, because there's a dual input on channel B. And it's big for a 4-channel mixer. I can get a 4 HP 4-channel mixer. But you've got the mono send and return, and it's that blend on the compression and on the distortion that is just really cool. I'd really love a stereo version of this.
Oh, yeah. And one of the nice things about having a blend knob in the compressor to do parallel compression is when you roll your own or do it as a post-process, there's always those phase issues. But
yes,
in a unit like this, the stuff just sounds so tight, and you can crush the heck out of it and then bring back some of those dynamics with that blend knob. Those things are awesome.
That's a really good point with the phase issues. I was playing around with driving cassettes not too long ago. I brought an old cassette deck home from a school I used to work in, hadn't been touched for 20 years or more. And just those phase issues, recording it out, driving it into the tape, the actual in and outs of the cassette deck itself sounded quite good. I gave up in the end. It's such a task to take a, say, 3-minute track and then say, right, I've got to listen to this for 3 minutes or go away and make a drink and come back while it goes onto the tape, and then I have to play it back in again. Even if it's set up and it's on the right output and input, it's a task in itself, and lining things up and phase issues just kind of drove me away.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely agree with that one. But yeah, what I'd like to start touching on is the Blue Box release. So that system, and I'll pull an image up of it, is that the kind of first really focused kind of modular album or body of work that you did, or is there something before that people should be aware of?
Well, I did an album trilogy before the Etudes series that we're about to talk about, and those were how I've usually done music, which is everything in the kitchen sink. Can't tell what's a guitar, can't tell what's a modular, can't tell what's a field recording. So yeah, for sure, this is the Blue Box release was the very first time I actually assembled a modular synth with a huge degree of initial conscious intent. I think like a lot of us, like, okay, I got a braids and a Renee, and I just need other things functionally. to make the system work. And we're going to test modules to see how I get on with them, et cetera, et cetera. But this was the first time I'm like, I have a plan, I have a design in mind, and kind of executed against that and recorded only with it. Yeah.
I'll pull a couple of images up. There's nathanmoody.bandcamp.com. People should go check out if they want to hear this. I'm not going to play any for any potential copyright infringement on YouTube and things like that. The only copyright infringement I've currently got is when I've put my own music on a track, forgetting it's signed with a publisher, and then being told that I either, well, they've when I've kind of contested it, it's still there, but then they swap all the ad revenue over. It's a pain in the ass anyway.
Oh my God.
And I've only ever done it on my own stuff. I've never done it on anyone else's, so I won't get into playing it. But let's pull up the album cover, and I'll zoom into the system as well. The album, I don't want to kind of pat you back too much in front of you, but it's fantastic. Really amazing body of work. Tonally, musically, far from just bleeps and bloops or a random selection of jams. It feels like a really cohesive body of work. And not a big system either, in terms of the big sound that it's getting. What was the kind of approach to doing this? How did it start?
3 words: Buchla music easel. So probably most people watching this stream know what the Buchla music easel is. But solid West Coast synthesis instrument, and intended to really be an instrument that you play, or it can be played completely on its own. But I wanted to explore specifically its functions and its workflow, but not its specific interface and not its specific tones. So I started working with these modules in the Mannequins series by Whimsical Raps. You can see 2 mangroves, a Just Friends, 3 Sisters filter, and a Cold Mac right in the center of this unit. And I was really kind of blown away, not just by their timbres, but they're really postmodern designs. And I was really getting into them, and I started to think, well, what if those lived in their own box, surrounded by some of the other kind of programming and sequencing features that the easel had. And so that was really the origin of kind of the design concept.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said, mentioning the design. It definitely does affect how we work. It's like picking the colour guitar you want. If we were all Strat players, but yours was red and mine was sunburst, or the way we gravitate to things. And the system, I'll pull the image up again. It's nicer than looking at my newly shaven head. It just looks like an instrument. It looks like someone's turned up. We could kind of argue in the chat room, I guess, if people disagree about how important swapping out knobs is, but I don't think you can argue that you look at that and it looks like the instrument. And as an album cover, I just love that this is it. That system, that album, that moment in time. I like that you still got it, by the way. Some people I know that work this way have a system and then it disbands. Maybe because they've only got one case. They pull it all out and they move on to version 2. I really like that, almost like referring to a guitar, or like a collection of guitars. There's this collection of instruments you've built for musical output. So in terms of this kind of easel mentality and the real focus on the Mannequin series, what led to the kind of choices you've made in terms of the kind of surrounding modules? We've got the LXD, dual low pass gate. There's an extra oscillator. There's the Tirana sequencer. Obviously the Sputnik controller and clouds. We'll start with the controller. Was that a particular playing method you enjoyed, or was that a really important part of capturing this easel?
Yeah, I found that by starting my modular journey with non-linear sequencers like the Rene, I quickly added, you know, a brains and pressure point to that. And that was, as strange as it sounds, that was the first time I actually kind of had a keyboard plugged into my modular. And I really started to be like, oh yeah, wait a minute, these things can make tones and sound, and I can actually control, you know, expressivity and stuff like that. So I started researching touchplate keyboards, and the feature to price ratio for the Sputnik just hit me where I lived. It only does a few things, but it does them really, I think, quite well. And what's odd about the Sputnik keyboard is that, unlike a lot of other keyboards, the keys are actually recessed from the front panel. And so you can't necessarily do nice, comfortable keyboard runs with your finger up and down, because you'll kind of, you know, take a couple of microns of skin off by doing that. But it was responsive with the right power supply. We can talk about that later on. And it also had these subdivision outputs on the far right, and that allows you to play polyphonically. Of course, in a system like this, you can only really play duophonically. Or if you have it in arpeggiation mode, the different those outputs on the far right can output different subdivisions of clock. And if you play polyphonic, even in mono mode, I believe it also has 3 different pitch outputs, including like a third and a seventh. So that just wound up being really, really flexible for my needs in such a small system.
Yeah. So in terms of, I'd like to touch on effects. Tom, that asked us before about compression, has said we've distinguished between recording and mixing processes. So how would we treat effects? For me, I vaguely answered Tom in the chat, knowing that I'd bring it up. I try to record things separately if I can. Lately, I've been using the Praxis Snake Charmer, which is 8 balanced line drivers out of the modular. So I've got 8 tracks out, and the Vermona TIA, transformer isolated audio output. So I've kind of got 10 outputs. I will try and record effect stems separately if I can. I have a track coming out on a label people might recognize, probably quite a way into the new year actually, and I multi-tracked all that out, not to then sit and tweak in the DAW, but just that thing of, if I listen back and the reverb's a bit loud, or this is a compilation that's been released as well, they say, you know, your track's so kind of drenched and wet and lush with reverb, it's too much or too little, just to give myself the option. But I always try and record just a stereo take from whatever my output mixer is. This is what I was listening to, this is what I had in my headphones, this is how I performed it, and I always capture that. And if I can, I'll pull a couple of extra stems through just in case. The majority of my effects are all in the modular as well, so I'll just record those all straight through. How about you? We'll talk about it for this release first. With the blue box, well, it's got clouds in the case. Was that just you made the decision of the levels and stuck with it? Or was there any another question as well, is there any multi-tracking going on where effects run separately? How did you approach that side of the production and release?
This is the first album I've ever done where every take is stereo, one take live. So absolutely no multi-tracking. When I started, I had an earlier build of this where I didn't have clouds, but I had an IntelliGel Spring Ray.
Yeah.
Because spring reverb, what's not to like? But honestly, at that point, I kind of had to record in mono, because spring reverbs are mono. They're unless you have 2 of them, which wouldn't fit. And so I wound up going with clouds, kind of on purpose to move away from the timbre of the music easel, which is kind of really driven by the fact there was a spring reverb built in.
Yeah.
And so I just found that I thought it sat well with the mangroves. The entire mix is being sent through clouds on almost every track. And so my approach usually is, in the context of this build, I look at clouds as just an integrated delay and reverb. It might as well be an earthquake or avalanche run, you know, functionally equivalent. But and I thought about actually doing that, but I wanted everything just in one box. So for most of my kind of more formal releases, I tend to multi-track a lot, but not for this series. The Etudes series are all pretty much all live takes.
Yeah, but there's a few people mirroring what I'm going to say in the chat, but it's impressive. I'd like to say I won't do too much blowing smoke up your bum, rubbing your trumpet, patting your back, however you want to say it. It gets a bit cringy when people do that and get gushy over things, but yeah, so it's really impressive. And I think it shows this kind of, and I like to think it's something in certain production realms that I could do as well, but that remains for other people to judge. It shows a certain amount of proficiency, I think, and real skill to be able to get these levels set, to balance things tonally, to know how, you know, even if you're working with a kind of Moog style bass patch, to know just how much to open the filter, because if it's going to sit with other things, it probably can't be a full Moog oscillator, full range frequency all the time, because they just dominate a mix like nothing else. Yeah, it shows some real skill.
Well, I've got a tip around that, actually. One of the things that can be really helpful for those who want to do kind of one take recordings and still have them be tonally balanced is rehearse while monitoring and in a DAW, just so that you can have a spectrum analyzer open. And then you can really start to see, wow, this sounds great in the cans or on my monitor, but I have this huge spike at like 25 hertz, and that needs to be filtered out. Or, you know, oh, all of my frequencies are kind of clustered in here and there. That's why they're fighting. Oh yeah, now I can visually see it. So that can be a good trick. You know, when you're setting up a patch and you're rehearsing it, rehearse it with some intent and some insight, and a spectrum analyzer, and actually a phase correlation monitor, especially when you're using something like clouds, is really important, because clouds and all sorts of other really intense reverbs, big sky, eventide space, they're just going to like decorrelate your left and right channels like crazy, and that's going to make mastering and preparation for release a lot harder. Yeah,
you touched on two really key points there for me. Intention being the first, and rehearsal. It's so important, I think, and that's why pieces of work like this come out well. I think, and other people as well whose work I admire, that I know they're really proficient on the instrument, and they would probably impress me if I turned up to their house, said, yeah, let's turn it on, and they built a patch and we listened and had a quick jam. There are people that would very much impress in, like, you know, 15 minutes flat, I'm sure. But I think having some intention and rehearsing with intent is what allows you to do this kind of thing. The patch for the release, well, it is a patch. The single patch recorded in one take that I did for the compilation I mentioned coming out next year, I probably had 4 or 5 run-throughs and lived with a patch for about a week before I settled with it. I did record a couple, each time thinking this one could be it, and listened to it. I took it out, I listened in the car, and it's not that thing of where you've just mixed a band and you listen in the car and think, you know, the guitar's too low, I need to brighten that up and pull it up in the mix. I couldn't do that. Because I just had my kind of reverb track and my performed stereo track, and that was it. So it was, right, I'll go do it again, and kind of go and work that way. One thing I'd like to pull up as a trick for doubling up your effects into stereo, I'm surprised not more people haven't jumped on this, from Worng Electronics, spelt wrong, W-O-R-N-G, from Australia. I met these guys at Super Booth around Easter this year. They have a mid-side decoding module that takes a left and right input at the top, gives you the mono mid output, the mono side output, and then you can patch those back in and then get a stereo back out. So if you've already got a stereo patch, but you want the sides to have some reverb on them, you patch the mono side out into, say, your spring reverb, pull it back in, and it's all analog hardware, so there's not really any latency involved. You can get effectively stereo effects out of a mono source, and it works amazingly well. 4 HP, I think Fonk sell them as kits, or they're available as modules. I have a couple of these around. I thinking about compression earlier, actually, of the original WMD compressor. It's got nice input and output saturation, but it's mono. I've got that in my system at the minute, running into this. And I can take, say, the mid output on this into the compressor, but then maybe take the sides out into a spring reverb and pull it all back in. It's a really good tool for that, and saves buying too.
Oh my gosh, that is so nice. The mid side is so misunderstood and not used often enough, in my opinion. I'm starting to do some mastering for other releases, and I EQ in mid side all the time. And so something like this, if you think about, one of the things that I tend to do is use filters for tonal control. So if you imagine being able to take a big, thick, drenched reverb and then take the side out and then filter out all the low frequencies, you can get this nice, tight bass right in the middle channel where it should be, especially if you're ever cutting to vinyl, and then have all the kind of the mids and highs blooming out into the sides. That's a great, great technique. And I know ALM has like those little 5 HP EQs.
Yeah.
Too. So if you even wanted to do mid-side EQ in eurorack, that would totally work.
Yeah, well, you mentioned EQ. A couple of things I'll pull up with that. There's this simple EQ from Music Thing Modular. Again, this is kind of I guess a module pro tip from me if you want to look at it that way. It's 2 channels. The top channel has treble and bass. Sorry, pull the image back up. The second channel has just a tilt, like tone pot style thing. So a pair of those gives you 4 channels of EQ. I sit 2 either side of my 4MS DLD in the feedback path, and I tend to use the tilts on the feedback path just so I can either darken or brighten up my delays. And I'll use the treble and bass either over the mix, or maybe they sit over the output of a reverb that I've got in the system. Just thinking about and shaping things with these makes a real difference. I know some people might find it hard to maybe offer 20 HP to this sort of stuff in a small rig, but a couple of these EQs, the PEQ from ALM is great as well. That's a dual parametric EQ. Also the, I'm going to blow my own trumpet here, the Ladik, I think it's the E110 that I did a video of a long time back.
God, Ladik stuff is amazing.
Yeah, so cheap. I'll pull Google Images up. It was called the EQ5 for a while, but I think it's the E-110. There's my thumbnail there at the top. Just a simple 5-band EQ. It's great. You know, 12.8 kilohertz, 3 kilohertz, 800, 250 hertz outs. Super simple. Cost me about £40. I think, in fact, less. I think it's £40 shipped second hand, but new they're about £50. Certainly well under $100 straight to your door. They sound great, and they're really good for aggressive processing. It won't completely isolate the bands. They do a fixed filter bank that will in a similar format, but you know, really scooping out mids, really shoving the bass up before it goes into some compression, or really aggressively pushing the highs. Really cool.
Man, that is like serious no-brainer territory if you have the space, because they're so inexpensive and they will make such a difference. You know, obviously with a rig like this, I've got to do all that outboard, which is fine. So there are some times when those space constraints really come into play. But yeah, if someone's got, you know, 416 HP suitcase or something like that, like carving some space out for this that may not be super sexy, but in terms of, it's not the latest and greatest oscillator or filter, but it'll just tighten up your mix like you wouldn't believe.
In the chat room, dissonant and a human machine connection. I've just mentioned this one, which is in my case actually. Rather stupid of me to forget. The TriTone from Happy Nerding, 3-band EQ, fully parametric in terms of the high shelf and the low shelf and the mid. There's switches just on the right to mix down through the channels, or it can be 3 completely independent channels. So if you're running 3 voices, or say you've got a kick drum and you want to use the low shelf, you can just go straight through the low shelf, but then say take the hi-hats through the high shelf or the mid parametric band. Really killer. The things Happy Nerding are doing with these dual concentric pots is saving a ton of space.
Oh man, I am so hot for concentric rings. You have no idea.
The TriTone makes a really good distortion module as well, because it takes the input. I mean, it's made for modular level. It's not like it can't handle it, but then can just add so much gain on top. It can be a multi-band distortion as well.
Wow.
And there's CV over the frequencies for all of them as well.
Boy, there's something you don't get in outboard gear.
Yeah, yeah. So you can turn that mid notch into a phaser, with an LFO in it, or just kind of poke around some sort of peak up in the high frequencies before hitting a reverb that does weird things.
You can turn this into a multi-band compressor. You can turn it into a de-esser. All sorts of options.
Yeah, really crazy. I think it really comes into its own EQ in a system, or more extensive filtering beyond basic high and low pass, when you've got a feedback path anywhere. I think it's really important. While we're talking EQ, we couldn't kind of gloss over it. We've got a bit of an honourable mention for shelves from Mutable Instruments. I'll pull up a quick image of shelves if people haven't seen that one. It's the only kind of mutable module, or one of 2 maybe, that doesn't seem to get that much love. Obviously everybody knows about rings and clouds, several memes about it and things, but this thing, I mean, this is big, this is a bit more of a serious workhorse, but it's crazy because every frequency band, either globally together with the bottom left input or individually on their individual sections, tracks volt per octave. So to have, say, a saw wave from an oscillator, carve out some intense 4-band EQ, and then set your sequences playing, we kind of think, all right, this is just intense EQ. But to then split the volt per octave and make shelves track pitch, it just becomes such an amazing wave shaper. And again, quite a lot of gain on tap. You can get the Q to near enough oscillate where you can ping it a bit like a Schweinman Res 4. And the 2 individual bands have full multi-mode outputs on the right-hand side if you want. Really cool piece of kit. Sounds amazing, totally analog. There's the clip warning between the in and out, but even driving it and clipping it sounds good.
It's funny that we're kind of talking about EQ, and distortion starts to keep coming into the conversation. And one of the things that people might be interested about the Blue Box is that all the distortion you hear is all the Cold Mac.
Oh, really?
Mixer. Yeah, it's all basically Cold Mac rectification of the audio signal. And that thing can just make things scream and howl in an amazing way.
Ah, I didn't know this. I know very little about Cold Mac. I know it's a kind of multi-utility. There's AND outputs, OR outputs. It can kind of mix, do logic. What is it? What would you class what would you class the Cold Mac as?
Well, the official user guide says analog utilities for creative mixing and patch surveillance.
Patch surveillance is cool. That sounds good.
So basically, it is a mixer and CV utility, mixing and CV utility. And what's interesting about it is that it has one knob that can control multiple things at once, and you can patch it in such a way that you can disable some of the things it can control. So the simplest way to think about it is in the upper left corner, there's a left and right input.
Yeah.
And then there's a master output in the lower right. you can patch 6 ins on one side and have 6 outs on the other side.
Okay.
So that's kind of one way to use it. But when you start cross patching, you can bring 2 audio signals in, and do a logical OR mix, and then take that out to left and right, and then the big knob, which is called survey, the survey knob, can either control left-right panning or hysteresis in between, the 2 channels being OR'd.
Yeah.
You can OR one signal and another signal, which basically is different polarities of rectification.
Yeah.
You've got a way to just pump CV out of whatever the knob's doing, and that can be routed somewhere else. It's kind of insane. And the person who wrote the most definitive write-up on Cold Mac is Martin Duderoff, and it's a PDF you can search online, just simply called Patching Cold Mac. And no one's done a more thorough study of this document. I think it's still technically unfinished, but there is a huge amount of knowledge in there. And Martin, both on Muff Wiggler forums and through this PDF, was instrumental to me in really helping me find my way around it.
Yeah, I've just found that now. I don't have a Cold Mac, but I like reading this stuff. So for me, I'm going to get into this. This idea of surveillance is really cool. I love the wording on stuff like this. But yeah, no, yeah. This looks really comprehensive.
It's really solid. Martin has put a huge amount of effort into this, and he's got, as you can see, some very basic kind of patch examples, but you can cross patch this stuff in a way that's just insane. Gil, who runs Whimsical Raps, who makes all the Mannequins modules, he both on Cold Mac and in Just Friends, dummy cables do interesting things too. So you can patch a dummy cable in just to make sure that, I don't want this to also pan left right when I want it to just control mix of audio 1 and audio 2. So there's a bunch of things you can do with it, and it's literally, in this system, it's the mixer, as strange as it looks.
Yeah, that's an interesting point on dummy cables. I like, not because I have as many modules that I need to do that with to stop them functioning in a certain way. I like having cables dangling as a means of performance and playing and recording. Do you find you do that? It's a kind of odd question, really. Some people will just grab a cable and just patch. I kind of like having lots just fan out to nothing, and I will pull in as I see fit.
I'm not much of a live patcher, actually. Although there are a couple of pieces on the bonus tracks, actually, on the album. The 2 to 3 bonus tracks have me just like doing some live patching as well, so that works in sometimes. But for me, I might change routing on 3 to 5 things in one patch at the most. But I don't do a lot of kind of build it up and then take it down kind of live patching. When I also need dummy cables, I'll pull one out of here, actually. It's always fun to also just use these little guys. This is just one of those little light jacks.
Yeah.
And so if you need a dummy cable and you don't want it dangling, these can be really handy and awful pretty.
Yeah. Yeah, they're really cool. Future Sound Systems make those. Mushy.1 do like a kind of plastic enclosed one as well.
Or you can take a bum cable and just cut it off too. That works.
Yeah. Mark Zeno's asked, can you talk about your sound design approach to animation? Now, we're kind of sticking around this blue box release at the minute. We will get onto the upcoming release, the red box, the kind of following album as well. Again, I'll pull the image up. It's not a huge system in terms of potential animation. We've got the Tirana in the corner, right-hand side, the Chaos Devices sequencer, and the touch controller, and the oscillators can be LFOs and things. But yeah, how are you kind of approaching these patches in terms of animation, modulation, control?
It brings us actually back to Cold Mac. actually. I found that kind of my sweet spot with this system is setting up a patch that I can mostly control evolution just through the survey knob on Cold Mac. Not every patch really makes that possible, but that's where it becomes really, really fun. Another ultra unsexy component that wound up being really critical is the quad attenuator from IntelliGel up in the €1. I regularly use that as a submixer in this system, because obviously when you tap any of the outputs other than the last one, that removes it from the mix. So you can still use 1 or 2 channels as an attenuator, and then use a couple of those as mixed channels, and then send that into Cold Mac. So that's been pretty handy. And of course, there's that huge horizontal white control strip on the keyboard as well, which is basically a either 5-volt or 10-volt CV generator ribbon controller. So that was really, really helpful as well.
Okay. Mark's, I took what he said wrong. Knowing that you've done animation, he literally meant animation, in that you've done stop frame animation before. So can you talk about your sound design approach to animation, sound design for moving image? I'll pull up a little bit of Sterile Flower. Again, amazing work. I'm not gonna. I'll wait until you've gone, and then I'll really kind of blow the trumpet. But
yeah, I'll keep this short because I know that we want to focus on kind of rig rundown stuff. So, for context, for anyone else who hasn't seen it, this is a stop motion animation that I did this past year, and it's scored entirely with one feedback patch from the Erbe Verb. And there's a couple of ways you can do it. This is clearly influenced by the Quay brothers, pair of American animators. And the way they work is that they don't animate anything until they've chosen the music, and they animate everything to the music. I did the opposite. This is all animated first and then scored later. And so basically this was a series of live takes. So I was basically live scoring the piece. I went through several takes, and then wound up kind of realizing, oh, this move here kind of built tension, or released tension in a way that was bad at first. And then ultimately I got, I think, probably 2 good takes, and then wound up doing a little bit of editing to kind of really tighten it up and make it work. And then the rest of the sound effects, Foley, and stuff like that, that was all actually recorded, using real mics and stuff like that in terms of the actual diegetic sound. So yeah, that was kind of how that was produced.
The Erbe Verb's a fantastic tool for that, and it's funny. Mark should ask this in the chat. He's been asking about reverb lately. It's a conversation we've been having, and a couple of others, Guido in the chat and Mark, talking about reverb. I think you can hear that it's the Erbe Verb. Not that that's a good thing or a bad thing. You can just, there's a character that the Erbe Verb has that I think either agrees with people or not. It very much does agree with me. What would you kind of say to that? Do you think it is, you can kind of tell that's what it is compared to other reverbs?
Definitely. I mean, it's an algorithm written by Tom Erbe, and it's got its own sound. But I think that what I wound up doing is I wound up filtering its output, and that really changed the character a little bit. And I think that why other people don't have effects units with CV outputs. That's the brilliance of the Erbe Verb, because that's what allows you to do feedback patches and not have it get out of control all the time.
Yeah, that CV out on the Erbe Verb, for anyone that's not seen, again, I'm doing my best to kind of pull images up as we go. Let's grab one of the Erbe Verb. It's an envelope follower that sits over the output of the device. So as the reverb gets too big, if you crank the decay up so it's really feeding back, you can patch the CV output back into the decay and attenuate that so it's inverted slightly, so that as it's getting bigger, the CV output's getting higher because there's more amplitude for that envelope follower to grab. That's then going to pull the decay back down. So it really easily allows you to just crank decay up full, which would normally kick and scream like mad after a while and it's been built up, and just really keep it in control. It's a fantastic tool that, again, this being modular, you can mirror yourself if you buy lots of envelope followers. You can have them dotted around to be able to do this kind of patching. I think, like you said, filtering it as well. I think a lot of people get kind of potentially stuck in older way of workings, and I've been guilty of that, reverb's end of chain, so that's the last thing in the patch. But especially spring reverb, for me, I really like oscillator spring reverb, then either filtering or folding or VCA or low pass gate. I really like shoving them kind of back earlier down on in the chain. I like any kind of chorusing style effects right after the oscillator as well. Mixing a couple of oscillators into like the feedback 106 chorus that they did, which is the Juno chorus circuit. Then do all my filtering and VCAs afterwards, which also kills that noise that you used to get off a Juno chorus circuit, because you can just shut that thing right off afterwards.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I should just mention general pages as we go in as well. Noise Jockey on Vimeo. There's plenty to check out. Performances, promo stuff, teasers. We can see you live there at the Hive Gallery with the Les Paul. Stereo Flower that I just played a bit of. So for me, the blue box, as we kind of move into this red box, and people can go check out a teaser for that on the Noise Jockey Vimeo page I just had up. It sounds more kind of gritty upper mids. It's all got quite a sound. Both releases are cohesive. You can tell, not just in musical approach, but in actual sound and tonality that they're having listened to both in the kind of same sessions. But they definitely sound different. So how was the kind of approach to putting together the red box system different? Was that still wanting to build upon an easel kind of concept, or was it a different thing?
It was inspired by Buchla in a different direction. I started really getting into the stuff from Mark Verbos, and the harmonic oscillator and voltage multistage. And of course, Mark's background is as a Buchla technician and a Buchla repair guy. And almost all of his modules are inspired or kind of very closely derivative of old Buchla units. So the red box was, okay, we've not perfectly emulated, but taken inspiration from the music easel's workflow. Now let's try to take inspiration from the Buchla's timbre and tonality. And so that was really the shift. And even though you listen to an album and you're like, oh, that's that oscillator, it's that filter, for me, the center of the red box system was the Verbos multistage sequencer. To me, that was what I responded to the most as a musician. You touched earlier on the idea of immediacy. And that, like, I'm trained as an illustrator, and I very early stopped painting with oils because oils literally sometimes never dry. And so I went to watercolor and dry medium because it's immediate. And with sequencers, I'm exactly the same way. I sold my Stilson hammer. I sold, the Metropolis I sold for other reasons. But when I can't ascertain state by looking at the front panel, I get freaked out. And so with the Stilson hammer, as like nothing is as powerful in it, relative to size in terms of density of functionality. But if I set a bunch of pitches and then I change page to go to gate, all of my relative pitch sliders are now gone. They're changed because now I've set all my gates. And it's great for live performance, repeating something you've already done, because you can save all the patches and everything. But for me, the Verbos multistage just has two channels and stage addressing. It has a gate output per stage, which is kind of cool. And there's just this is what I liked about the Metropolis actually too. Just there's an immediacy where you look at the front panel and the interface is never lying to you about what its state is. And I find that, especially when I perform live, that's more important to me than having 3 or 4 channels going at once that I kind of can't look at a panel and immediately understand what's going on.
That's interesting. That's also the way that Olivier at Mutable Instruments seems to be going, in terms of him canning so many modules in such a short space of time. It's very much for those kind of design reasons. I've not used the multistage, to be honest, but I know it's it can be an envelope, it can be a sequencer. So is that, in terms of this release, and I'll pull an image of the red box cover up that's got the case on. Is that the real kind of central hub? Was that the first thing you were going to in terms of patching, or?
For the most part, yeah. Some tracks feature it driving the whole piece. Some tracks have 2 melody lines each, both coming out of the Verbos multistage. Some tracks actually had, you'll see there's an epic modular Benjamin in this build. So sometimes its Rungler circuit was controlling the timing of the Verbos multistage. So I wound up, even if I wasn't starting with it, everything was always talking to it or routing through it, and that really wound up being the center of the whole design. I
see the Spring Ray made a comeback.
It did. I can't get rid of that thing, man. That thing sounds so good. Yeah. I gotta say, the new version where you can actually tune the actual pitch of the feedback, that is an upgrade worthy feature addition, I think.
Yeah, I think I remember Daniel saying from IntelliGel they managed to get the noise so much lower by, is it current driving the tank rather than voltage driving the tank? I can't remember which way around was which in terms of new and old version, but you know, they'd made significant kind of test condition audio improvements as well. Again, you could see aesthetics is massively important. Again, it looks like an instrument, which a lot of kind of Frankenstein systems don't.
And you know, that's not important to some people, and that's great. What's important is the music and the outcome. And so for me, I feel more inspired when the system is more aesthetically unified. But some people totally don't care, and that is freaking awesome. You know, it just is a matter of what's going to get you to something that's going to express what's inside of you the fastest.
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of this, you've lost the control of the Sputnik. Is that why the light strip's in the top corner, just for some performative? I mean, obviously we can move sliders and knobs and actually perform on any module, but in kind of touch and interface, there's the light strip in the top right. Was that just to kind of play into that way of working a little bit?
It was. That was a way just for me to gang controls together. So I could just, you know, have its CV output routed to multiple places through a mult. You'll see there's no mults in the case, but I've got those little 6-pointed star shuriken little, you know, mults that I can use. But also for transposition. So I've found that the LS1, that's the Sound Machine's LS1 touch strip, its CV output's really pretty accurate. And so I was using that to actually transpose the pitch of the Verbos voltage multistage. So that got a lot of use in that regard as well.
Okay. I see you've got 2 mixers in this system. You've the Verbos pan and scan, kind of bottom row, middle-ish, 4-channel panning mixer. We spoke to Chris Meyer about that in the first rig rundown episode, and so it's got a nice saturation stage if you kind of push the levels, voltage control panning, but there's also the Sputnik 6-channel stereo mixer top left. Now for a system that size, with that many voices potentially, it's not, you know, rows and rows of drum modules that need a lot of mixing. Why is there kind of 10 channels of potential mixing?
I'm glad you asked. It's a little freaky in a system of this size, but one way, the first way to answer that is look at all the outputs on the Verbos harmonic oscillator. So you can actually take tons and tons of outputs just from that one module, and you can overdrive some of them. I agree with Chris. The distortion characteristics of all of Mark Verbos's designs are just luscious and sound amazing. Another answer is that I used the pan and scan not as a stereo mixer, but as a 2-bus submixer. So this way I could pump 4 signals into it, take the left channel, route that to the audio damaged dub junior, and then take another 2 or 3 or however many and route that to the spring ray, and then take those things. And then the Sputnik mixer really was like my recording console or my mixing console. Plus the Sputnik gives you automated left-right panning, which of course the scan and pan does as well. But it also gives you immediate clickless muting, which when you're doing live takes really adds to the dynamism of the end result.
Yeah, I should owning the Sputnik mixer. I don't have a pan and scan and pan, but it is clickless muting, and there are several modules, I'm not going to name names, that say they have clickless muting and they don't. And if you're running low end through, you know, deep sine wave, like a pure wave, like a sine or a triangle, or even like a long kick drum, and you go to mute it and it thumps, like clicks through the rig, it's horrible. You're going to know about it. Interesting thing with the LS1 as well, you've said in how I use it and how I remember speaking to Richard Devine about it as well, that I think Richard uses them as kind of fader throws on his effects. So they'll open up a VCA that then hits the input of a reverb or a delay. I very much like using it as a kind of macro controller as well. Again, multied out into different things and through attenuators, so that it might be my kind of get bigger slider where envelope times increase, reverb increases, but then I could pull it all right back down and everything shrinks to something more percussive and dry.
Yep. And I one of the first 2 shows I ever did, I did it with 5, or first eurorack shows I ever did, I did it with 5 rows of eurorack synths. And what I found is that just the cognitive load of managing a system that big was really, really hard. And so I find that, you know, you use the term macro controller, which is perfect. Getting back to the blue box, that's what that survey knob's all about on Cold Mac. It really conserves your mental bandwidth, knowing that I'm going to do this one thing, it's going to have this cascading effect. And it really allows you to be either more expressive or change more things at once without being like, what's the state of this and where do I do that? And having that be really, really smooth, I think is critical.
You mentioned, another thing I want to touch on with you mentioning the scan and pan, you know, when you said, have you seen how many outputs the harmonic oscillator has? I'm just on the Verbos website for people that haven't seen. But you can, and this is a kind of question really, you can do the harmonic scanning and the spectral tilt on all these kind of additive overtones, the first 8 harmonics that this controls. Were you taking harmonics that were quite a distance apart into the pan and scan? Is that why you approached doing it on that as opposed to the oscillator itself? Because you can scan through them and tilt on it on its own.
Well, yeah. So some of the timbres you'll hear on this upcoming release features, you'll notice, or viewers will notice that there's this little arrow pointing to one of the outputs on the left. And that's basically the sum of all of the sine wave harmonics coming out of this thing. So what you can do is you can scan through those in different ways, and it becomes this really vibrant output. But you can't scan through the other wave shapes. You can't scan between all those crazy harmonic sines and the square wave and the sawtooth and the ramp. So and the triangle. So with the pan and scan, you can do both, which is pretty exciting. But I also use the pan and scan to actually manage the output of the pendulum as well, which I almost never took the filter outs because the filter out levels are super, super low.
Okay.
So I was always working with the raw stuff and then sending that out, you know, usually into the spring rate, which actually softened it up quite a bit.
Yeah. One thing I'd like to mention at this point, and I have a video, again, here I go blowing my own trumpet, going live on Monday, tomorrow, for those watching live, of the Rebel Technology mix. I've got the Mix 2 and Mix 3 here, but there's a whole 4-stage kind of mix thing that they've got going on. The Mixer 2, a 4-channel stereo mixer, works for CV as well, and it's a really cool way of working. I had 2 voices set up, 2 envelopes into 1 and 2, and then 2 sample and holds into 3 and 4. 1 sample and hold was around a bar in length, took 4 beats or 4 triggers to give me new information. The other was every kind of 16th note. And using the panning as a kind of crossfader to route things. So the left and the right output were independent kind of CV bus A and CV bus B outputs. They weren't left and right by any stretch of the imagination. And just being able to crossfade in a little bit of an envelope that's from the second voice, just to get this kind of push and pull and a little bit of influence across the pair of them, rather than just patching into a mixer, into one voice, into another mixer and another voice. I think that's really important. It seems it is to you as well, this idea of kind of architecture and back end, a couple of set really nice pieces, be those effects or oscillators, and then just control. All the kind of utility stuff is what's made these releases what they are.
Absolutely. I love that idea that you were just describing. And I think that when people, I almost want to encourage like the next manufacturer who comes out with a mixing module, like don't call it left and right, call it output 1 and 2. And if you really start thinking about these things as buses as opposed to left and right, you can do things like, you know, being able to pan between sample and hold and other wave shapes just as CV, and like that's super powerful.
Yeah, another couple of things I'll pull up while we're on that. Part of that same series from Rebel Tech, the Mix 04 is a 16 VCA matrix in a similar size. Amazing tool for that. The other mixers, the Mix 03, and these are really high quality, bleed free, noise free, is a more simple 4-channel mixer. Mix 1, you can use very much like Mix 2, but this has, again, a left and right output, but it's a volume per side, as opposed to volume control down the left and a pan control down the right. These all connect through an audio summing bus on the circuits, just little expander cables on the back. So if you want 2 16 VCA matrices into 2 small mixers into a stereo mixer, you can do it, and it will grow and shrink as your system kind of expands, or you put a couple of them together or not. One really cool thing having the, and again I'm quite proud of this video, so I'll blow my own trumpet. I plugged the inputs into this one, the Mix 03, but then you can sum the outputs and the inputs as well. So I had the inputs into the Mix 03, but I was taking the left and right output of the 02, and I use the Mix 03 as a separate mixer for my effects send. So the 4 ins go into Mix 03, they become available on this mixer that's up on screen. I do my stereo mix, pan them a little bit, take my left and right out to record, but then the Mix 03 just becomes a mono kind of summing mixer. So then on its own output, I think I fed it into the Erbe Verb or ZDSP. Really cool way of working. And again, nice. As you said, the Coma Poltergeist. I remember talking to someone when this came out, and the first thing one of my friends said was, imagine that controlling CV, or each output goes to a separate effect. Because Coma had that, I'll see if I can find it. It's well worth sticking with me if I can find this, because it's amazing. They had I don't know what to say, like a speaker hat almost.
Oh yeah, it was the hard hat with like quad speakers on it.
Yeah, I mean, I might have to troll through NARM videos to find it, and I'm not going to do that on here, but to demo it, because you're not in a quad listening environment at a trade show, they had the kind of builder's hard hat with poles coming off of it. And you go up to the booth, you'd put the hat on, and then these 4 poles would have speakers around your head. But just imagine them going to, say, the back left out goes to a folder, the front left out goes to the delay, the top, the front right goes into a verb, and the back right goes into a filter, and then scanning and merging between all these can become so performative, either by hand and manual control or by CV.
Oh, absolutely.
One last thing as I'm sidestepping away from the actual releases we're talking about. Bit of a dull image, but the Bends from Warmstar is another really cool kind of routing module. It takes 4 inputs, A, B, C, and D, but then you've got CV influence over it, but you get a positive and negative output for A, B, C, and D. But you can route the amount of signal from A to B, the amount of signal from B to C, the amount of signal from A to C, the amount of signal from B to D and A to D. You kind of see in this little graphic there in the middle of the module. So if you've just got 4 LFOs or 4 sample and holds or 4 envelopes, and they all just want to kind of tickle each other's output but still be a main, or really completely cross mix them, it's a really cool way of working.
Wow. That almost gets me past the fact that the logos are typesetted hobo.
Yeah.
Sorry,
yeah.
I'm a designer by trade, so that's
I'd be lying if the little star in the corner and the font didn't take me when I first saw it.
But who cares? I mean, like, we're sitting here talking a lot about aesthetics, but like that's a panel layout and a set of functions that I don't think I've seen before. That's super cool.
Yeah, really nice way of working. I've just kind of saved an image as we cross from Blue Box. We've just mentioned the upcoming release Red Box. I've just very quickly thrown. I should lie and say that I prepared this beforehand. I didn't. I've just really quickly done this. Put both images next to each other so I can pull them up. We move from, well, the immediate thing is we move from 1 row of modules in the controller to 2. The red box immediately looks bigger. Sonically similar, though, I would say. What were the kind of external effects on the red box was the first kind of thing I wanted to ask. We can hear the delay in there, we can hear the reverb, the spring ray. Anything else over the output, or was this recorded the same way?
That's a great question. So some of the pieces that are recorded were mono or were close to it, only because sometimes the stereo spread trying to mix what voices I had at the time just wasn't really singing to me. So I'm just like, let's simplify, let's streamline, let's get the tones right, let's get the expression and expressivity right. So about the only thing I ran this through after the outside of this box was in the DAW. I ran it through Valhalla DSP's Vintage Room reverb.
Yeah, that's great.
And that's just to spatialize it. Like, I don't think the mix ever got more than 20% wet. Just enough to just give it a little bit of air, give it some physical space. And I found that to really suit this material. So I think maybe every track had that going on in post. But again, like really subtle, trying to really let the, you don't want to hit a spring reverb with another reverb super hard because that just gets really strange. But
yeah,
I found that spatialization to be handy.
Thinking of effects, I meant to ask, there's an almost kind of shimmer reverb effect that you've used on these releases. Is that just clouds on the blue box with the pitch turned up?
Yep, that's all it is. It's just clouds.
Yeah, it has that, well, the feedback blend mode turned up and that kind of pitching shimmer. How do you find clouds for getting an octave shift? Do you find it easy to tune? I always find it a little bit awkward to just get the 1 octave up, the full knob turn being 2.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I tended to, I've experimented in some patches trying to get intervals and kind of make it kind of pseudo chords, and that thing is just twitchy. I have not really had a lot of success in doing that. I also find that octave up, it gets that classic, eventide shimmer kind of tone. Octave down, I almost never use. I find it's just muddy and smeary and kind of indistinct. So.
Yeah, I just wanted to know that that wasn't me. We spoke just before we came on air about this kind of tonal difference between these two releases in the kind of upper mids, and they are cohesive as two bodies of work. But I did wonder, was one maybe processed slightly differently? Had you got a new saturator or something? And it's much simpler than that. You touched upon the kind of core of the patching being different. The blue box, you said, is all square wave based on the Mannequins, and red box then is essentially sine wave based from the Harmonic oscillator. And for anyone that listens to these two, I don't kind of know where I'm going with this, but it's just the point I wanted to make about just kind of listen to that upper mid and how, because of the core of these oscillators being different, even with the same approach and a similar patching style, there's just an air of difference about it. And I guess where I'm going is, with this kind of more West Coast approach to synthesis, this is why I think, even though their cores can be quite similar, a DPO sounds different to a Verbos complex oscillator, which sounds very different to a Sputnik dual oscillator, which is different to an Endorphins, which is then different to the feedback 259 modules as well. I'd encourage people to try and listen to those more subtle differences. There might be one that speaks to you more than the other if people are looking to purchase any of this stuff.
Yeah, I think that the cores of the oscillators is probably the biggest difference. Although I would also say that a lot of the distortion, all the distortion that came out of the Blue Box record is all rectification, and all the distortion coming out of the Red Box release is either coming out of the scan and pan, as we mentioned, has great distortion characteristics, or the audio damage shapes. So that definitely is filling out a lot of that harmonic space. But the mastering chain was all the same, and didn't change interfaces midstream or anything. So I personally chalk that up really to kind of what the origin of the sounds are like. Just like if you listen to, we're going to use the guitar example again, the bright shimmery sound of like a Jaguar or a Stratocaster, it's going to cut through in a different way than like the meat and warmth of a Les Paul, because the pickups are different.
Yeah. The way it then drives everything else downstream changes. Exactly. One thing, this is kind of very West Coast in approach to synthesis. Again, I'll pull the image of both setups up for both the blue and red box releases. There's no complex oscillator in there, but you're getting those kind of tones in terms of patching. Is there a kind of reason that you've not gone straight down the effectively Buchla 259 clone route like a DPO or a Verbos complex like the Sputnik? Is there a reason they're not in there, or is it just kind of by chance that's not what's happened?
To a certain degree, it's space.
Okay.
But to a lesser degree, it's that all of these, all the oscillators I'm using have FM inputs, so I can take a simple, in that kind of classic additive West Coast mindset, start with a really simple sine wave and then make it more complex instead of starting with a rich thing and then filtering it down. The mangroves, I remember Chris actually on the last rig rundown was bemoaning the fact that not a lot of oscillators out there had linear linear FM. The mangroves have linear FM, which is great. And then the harmonic oscillator it's really like old Buchlas, where there's a built-in slew to the FM. So if you change the FM index, it's sludgy and it kind of catches up eventually, and it's a super cool effect. So I found that, especially having a Benjamin in the red box, I'd argue right there is a complex oscillator in its own right. So I just found that I could have enough cross-patching and modulation capabilities that the traditional architecture of a DPO or complex oscillator, both of which I've owned, just wound up not being necessary.
Yeah. Okay. Another interesting point from Mark saying that what mood do you have in terms of kind of preconceived idea for approaching an album, and is that kind of dictated by the modules, or do you buy the modules to fit the creation you want to make?
That's a great question. Historically, most of my albums have been really thematic, and I'm going for a certain place in time or a certain evocation of something. But these Etudes records, you know, we're talking about the two modular ones, but there's one that features only the OP1 as well.
Yeah.
Those, that's why I called them the Etudes series. They're studies.
Yeah.
And so for these, I really wound up finding instruments, or instrument components in this case, that really wound up just, for me, they felt euphonic. There was just something that grabbed my ear about them. And as I worked with them and started to figure out where they fell apart or where they could be pushed, I just wound up feeling like they were speaking a certain vocabulary that matched with what I wanted to say. So for these releases, these are really studies about how I'm expressing myself with these certain instruments that, you know, I've pre-selected and configured to kind of,
Yeah,
you know, speak with my voice. But typically, my other albums and other releases tend to be much more thematic.
yeah.
You know, I mean, I give it to the listener on a silver platter, but there's definitely kind of conceptual underpinnings to a lot of the other work that I do that isn't present in these releases.
Yeah, I'll bring up, again, with it being not modular, I've not focused on the second Etudes, the white box with the OP1. But this is all on nathanmoody.bandcamp.com. For those watching back on YouTube, I'll put all this in the description, several links to all the stuff we've mentioned.
And there's no release date for it, but here's a teaser. Etudes IV will be coming out at some point, and it doesn't feature a synthesizer at all. So that'll be weird.
Is that, feel free not to answer if you don't want to give it away, but is that guitar and a load of pedals?
It'll be weird.
It'll be weird. Okay, we'll stick with that. When is Redbox coming out? For those, we've mentioned this a few times. It's not out just yet.
That's a great question. Cassettes actually exist, but these will be available for purchase on December 8th.
Okay.
The cassettes, as with all the series, all the releases in this series, only the cassettes have continuous mixes per side. And then when you buy the tape, of course, or if you buy it digitally, it's got individual tracks, and each release comes with basically a third side, like 15 minutes of extra bonus tracks as well. So that drops on December 8th.
Yeah, cool. Again, it's teasers of this stuff, and you will find it on Bandcamp that I will link. It's interesting, the question from Mark, and your approach sort of speaks to my recent kind of workings with some music as well, in that I think you get to know the gear so well that it's a kind of two-way feedback street, in that it sometimes speaks to the gear sometimes speaks to me. That's the kind of entry statement into a psychiatric hospital, but it speaks to me in a way that it definitely influences me, and that might sit with me for a few days or a week in terms of an idea, and then work and output and music and recordings come from that. And I think it's a bit of a two-way thing, which comes with learning the gear. So when I want to do something, I know which tool to reach for the right job. But I think they do inspire things as well. The one I'd like to mention, the Instruo Harmonaigñ, really cool piece of kit. I'll be honest, I owe them a video on this, and have done for some time. Sorry, Jason, if you're watching. But it's one of my most used bits. I think that's why I've not done the video yet, because I don't want to take down the patches that I have with the thing. I get so absorbed by it. It's a quad quantizer that takes a single input and gives you a 4-voice chordal output, all in CV. So you can see the 4 outputs at the top: root, third, fifth, and seventh. They've all got individual slew. It will generate a gate for every new note it creates. If you're using random or LFOs to influence this, you will get derived gate information. incredibly musical. You can punch in the scale on the keyboard buttons. Excuse me. You can punch in and out transposition. That slider near the top left, you can do negative or positive transposition and then key that in and out with the button. Really nice performative feature. You can invert the chords. You can do sort of classic closed or drop or open chord voicings. Really cool piece of kit. And around the time my daughter was born, well, obviously an emotional time for anyone, a certain kind of overwhelming emotion just before and just after she was born. And I knew what I wanted to do kind of musically, but this seemed to speak to me at the same time. I couldn't say which one it was, whether I would have done the same things without this or whether I would have done this without that kind of overwhelming emotion of that period. So it's kind of a definite two-way thing for me.
I agree. And I think that when you read interviews with other folks, other musicians about, you know, what inspires you, a lot of us will always say, like, a new piece of gear inspires a lot of us. And I think that what's important is when we do get those new pieces of gear and we start hearing some of those new timbres, it's not a matter of just like, oh, this sounds cool, let me work with it. I think the most important thing is to be like, wow, that speaks to me, and then step back and go, why? What is that making me feel? Why am I feeling this way? Is this reminding me of something? Is this leading me to an emotional place that I was at before, and oh yeah, that was kind of like this? And really stepping back and self-analyzing, why is this speaking to me? What is this conveying to me emotionally? And I think once you get to that point, gear can absolutely be meaningfully inspirational to further your voice, you know, and share that with other people.
Just to pull a question up from the chat, we've got there a question from Barlow that I've just highlighted for you, Nathan. What's the driving force for the case? Layout and functionality, or the aesthetic look?
Definitely functionality. I definitely lay things out in terms of a signal flow, which may not always be strictly linear. But I always start with functionality first, because you know what? I know where to get colored eurorack M3 screws. I know I can go to Thunk and get any color of knobs I want. I know I can, you know, call up, you know, Grayscale and get unifying panel graphics. Like, all that stuff is doable. But if the components don't work together, especially in a small system, you know, you really have to be careful around signal flow and making sure you don't put yourself into a corner where it's just like, it's a small system and it's portable and it sounds cool, but I can't go anywhere with it compositionally or performance-wise. So for me, it's always working backwards from functionality, for sure.
Yeah. Question wasn't to me, but I'd very much say the same thing. It's got to work how I want as an instrument first.
Yeah. And you don't always get it right on the first try.
No. So if you spend all that time getting the aesthetic look how you want and it doesn't work, and then I'm going to have to take things out, repanel them with Grayscale, rechange all the knobs around, I'm going to certainly be in a mood about that. So totally. That would be the kind of last thing for me. Another question from the chat. Matt asks, what's your approach to composing with the Bendulin? He's always find the lack of 1-volt proctive input mysterious.
It's a funky beast for sure. I'm trying to think back. The Redbox recordings were done earlier this year, so it's been a little bit. And Todd Barton owns that Bendulin now. I actually wound up selling it. I did basically two different kinds of things with it. First is sometimes I would just embrace it for the weird, semi-controllable thing that it is, and just let it do textures and say, okay, I need something either to fit this mood, or the mood's working for the piece really well, but now I have like this frequency range that feels empty technically. And then the Bendulin was really good for that. Also really great for percussion when you send it through really aggressive envelopes. However, since I was also using the Verbos multistage, which unless you in my rig, you'll notice that there's a disting for
Yeah.
for quantization. But the Verbos multistage is unquantized anyway. So if I've already got a melody line going, or actually with that rig, it was more like the bass line would be figured out, I would just tune it by ear. And one of the nice things about all the Verbos modules and the Buchla format, which I'm getting into as well, is sliders are awesome. You can't tell I like sliders by looking at this image. And so with the Verbos multistage though, the fader throws, the slider throws are super short, but they're full output. They're like 0 to 5 volts. Yeah. So you gotta run this stuff through attenuators. But if you do, throw it through an attenuator, so you're only going from 0 to 1 volt, then all of a sudden tuning melody lines a stage at a time actually becomes fairly easy. Yeah. So that was the other approach that I took when I did want to use it for tonal or melodic material.
I think that's key as well in terms of analog sequencing, and I still very much like unquantized analog sequencing and a quantizer, as opposed to, say, a stepper acid, sequencer 1, Rene. Everything has its place, and it's why most of us that are heavily into this stuff have more than one way of working. But when you get a knob, or like the top row of pressure points, for example, is 8 volts. So if you're using that for pitch, that's 8 octaves of pitch. That's a grand piano's worth of pitch on a tiny little knob. So my kind of magic number for me on a quantizer is usually 2 volts. I like working within about a 2 octave span for most sequences, or 1 volt, as you said. And it makes that tiny sort of 3 centimeter slider throw on a module, or that one knob turn, much easier to tune things in.
Totally, and it lets you embrace things like accidentals. So you're working in a key, and you know what key you want to be in with your quantized sequence, but then maybe you find just at this one moment there's this interval that's not in the scale, but it just still works. You can't do that with a fully quantized system. Yeah,
and the other nice thing of working that way, full analog range sequencer, then the attenuator after, is you can keep the shape of a sequence but adjust its attenuation. So as you say, maybe attenuate so the max voltage is 1 volt. So I've got an octave's worth of slider throw or knob turn, and I can get the shape of the melody I want, but then make those peaks change as I adjust the attenuation. And say put it in a VCA. Use a VCA for static attenuation at a volt, but then maybe just have a ramp LFO, so the shape stays the same, your sequence is repeating, but maybe the VCA just opens a little bit towards the end, and it's a really nice way of working.
Totally. And actually, running unquantized stuff through a quantizer with slide is something people are going to hear a lot of on the Redbox recording, because the Verbos multistage lets you slide any individual stage, and then you just get these lovely little violin style trills going up and down, which I can't get enough of.
It's almost like reverb.com put a great video of someone up, I forget his name, about this, a piano player talking about mimicking blues guitar licks on a piano and flamming and trilling notes because you can't bend piano keys like you can guitar. And that's a way of doing it in Modular. As you say, it becomes these nice little note trills, and slides almost become like a kind of funk moog bass line, like Parliament Funkadelic, where they slide back down the black keys. All the notes are quantized, but you get the effect of the slide.
I love that stuff.
It works really well. It's come up from a few people in the chat, so I want to bring it up. The use of low-pass gates and thoughts on various low-pass gates. There isn't one in the red box, if I remember right.
There aren't, no, not a one. The only envelopes in there are from a single IntelliGel Quadra. The reason on the blue box I wanted to go towards the LXD was because I had an Optimix, and that thing's just awesome. Love the Optimix. I also really love the LXD. I think that one of the wonderful things about low-pass gates and that are driven by Vactrols is that every single one of them is super different. And so in the blue box, there's of course is a 12 dB per octave filter slope on one of the LPGs, and then a 6 decibel per octave slope. And they sound super different in a really, really great way. So, and of course, you can see behind me, this is what the red box became, a little bit bigger. And I've got the Verbos amplitude and tone controller.
Yeah.
So right now in this box, actually, I have an LXD, an Optimix, and that. So I've got 5 in there, not counting envelopes. So I find that some can be thumpy. So sometimes I'll run something through a low pass gate, and then I'll high pass filter it just to clean it up.
Yeah.
If it's like super boomy or woofy, which can happen. But I just find that, you know, if the material and the texture fits, they're kind of more convenient sometimes than an actual envelope. But you can still drive it through CV and use it as an actual, you know, envelope. It's still a low pass gate. You're just not striking it.
Yeah.
So I find them just worth their weight in gold in terms of how I compose.
Yeah.
Do you use them much, Ben?
I've had a few Optimixes, 3 I think, and one I absolutely love. It must just be that variation in Vactrals in terms of saturation and ring that really kind of speaks to me. The thing that's doing it at the minute, I'll pull it up, and I'm fairly new to it. Again, this is something that's come in for demo. So I find doing the demos, well, it's a kind of fortunate position to be in with lots of things coming in and out that I can try, but it forces me to learn things quite quickly. And I, you know, have to put the time in, because I'll agree a date to do a video, and in sometimes a matter of a week or two, I have to do a video. And I can't look like an idiot that I don't know what I'm on about. Just, you know, no one wants to do that. So the value in the videos is being able to get this information into my head and methods of working. But the natural gate from Rabid Elephant, really cool piece of kit.
That is on my short list in a very big way.
Yeah, so it's really, I mean, it's got a few different modeled behaviors on the switch in terms of they're effectively exponential or reverse expo logarithmic style shapes, but we can hit this thing, which is like the strike, where you ping it and it rings. You can control and CV the decay of that ring. It's much more controlled, less kind of wild, I guess, than low pass gate and Vactrals, but really fantastic bit of kit. Really like the natural gate at the minute. I like running, like with the Optimix, I really like putting a CV offset in it and striking it and then taking the CV output as my envelope. When you get that kind of magic drop of a Vactral, you can't always quite get that from envelopes. So just putting an offset in, you know, 5 volts, 8 volts, whatever you kind of want the peak of the envelope to be, and then just hitting the strike or ping on an Optimix or an LXD. I haven't got an LXD, but liking the Optimix, I imagine it's just as good.
Yeah, you know, the only thing it doesn't have are attenuators for its inputs. Otherwise, functionally, pretty darn similar.
Yeah.
But when you only have 7 rows of 84 HP, these are the decisions you make.
A box in the C, and I just asked in the chat. I won't pull the chat up because I'll just read it out. But a box in the C's YouTube page, for anyone that doesn't know, well worth a listen. It's really amazing pieces, patches, performances, gorgeously lit. I'll mute the video, but let's just kind of pull this up. Really well shot, great system, great setup. We've only spoke very briefly in the past, but a box in the C on YouTube, people should go check this guy out as well. He's asked, he's put Nathan's output is phenomenal. He's curious if working within the limitations of the OP1 or on these 2 boxes is more satisfying creatively than working with more choices all at once.
Well, hi, Paul. Paul is a total brother from another mother. I love that guy, and one of the absolutely most talented musicians I think out there right now. For me, the small system thing tickles a certain itch, but you know, you can't compose on a small system without hitting against its limits all the time, because that's the point of using a small system. So I've got several releases in the pipeline right now that don't have that restriction at all. And that's just been really, like, when you come back to more options, you think differently. And the experience of doing these studies on very, very small systems has totally changed how I patch, totally changed how I look at a mix. Even with, you know, I've got, you know, the 606 and an OB6 and some other things here. I'm finding that all of my mixes now are a lot more minimal than they were before I started doing this stuff. So I think there's a place for it. I would argue there's a place for it in every musician's practice, because you learn a ton, but at the same time, it makes you really appreciate when the shackles come off. You're like, okay, now I've got some serious bigger ideas that can be really rewarding when you kind of get back to a full studio setup.
Yeah. I mean, I'd mirror that. I don't have the musical output from a modular that you do. People do sometimes ask, if you want to chat about projects I've been involved in, we'll talk about that elsewhere. Modular, nowhere near this kind of output that you have, although there is some releases coming. But I very much feel the same way. It's like the modular podcast free module challenge thing. I really love just getting absorbed in something really small. The free module challenge is great because, okay, I might get a really cool track or two, and, you know, an interesting study, not really a jam. It might be more intentful than just a kind of jam, but like you said, a study of something that is also musically interesting. But I instantly know what I want module number 4 to be, and not very long after that, I know what I want module 5 and 6 to be, and then I'm kind of in a row. You know, we're getting nearer the kind of blue box and red box then, and I find going super in and minimal and just coming out a little bit is kind of that magic space where things happen. And then, like you said, having that as part of a bigger ecosystem, I think becomes way more interesting than just always going to the big. I mean, I say this with all this there, but it becomes, that's a kind of mess of demo rig and all sorts of stuff, but it is way more satisfying.
And also oh, sorry, I didn't mean to step on you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say those restrictions, like you said, butting up against those restrictions completely get rid of the kind of writer's block thing that some people have. You know, I'm always patching the same way, or I don't feel like I'm getting anything from it. Come down to one module. I have a series of videos, again, blowing my own trumpet, but I've 12 done, and I may put them up, you know, kind of one a week. Like the DivKid TV channel, I'm working on this idea of series that, you know, Friday night at 7 p.m, this is what's going to be on. So I've got 12 ready, and I'll probably release them in the new year, and it's a single module, just patched feedback on itself.
Oh, nice. So
it's noisy, you know, and if it's an oscillator, there's no way I can get it to play a tune. You're not going to walk away whistling it to work the next day, but it's intense, and it's just a study of one thing, patched back on itself into all its CV inputs, and knowing how that module reacts and what it does in that state. Like I said, I might immediately think this would be really cool with an LFO, and then I put an LFO in and I think, right, the third module needs to be this because I've got this vision in mind of where I want it to go. And it informs a new little small system. And I love this idea of I kind of live with that system for a week or a month or until I've recorded whatever material I want, and then blossom out again and then pull back in again. It's a really interesting way to work for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a huge benefit to the learning curve doing it that way too. Like, I would not have a clue how to use Mannequins Cold Mac if I didn't force myself to have it be the only mixer in the entire system. Yeah. You know, and then it's just like, well, this is the hand I've been dealt. How far can I really push this? And that's how you really get, as you said, to learn individual elements, but also to get out of the eurorack, abyss, by actually then knowing, this is the one thing I'm missing, and you buy with a lot more intent and a lot more purpose.
Yeah, definitely. Chris Meyer from Learning Modules just reinforced what we've said in the chat as well, that if you go watch the Rig Rundown 1, the first video we did last week with Chris, he's got this huge system. Great video he took us through. that as well, but saying he has a 1-row 84 HP system that is his kind of travel case and his little, I think he calls it his focus palette.
Hmm.
And I love that idea of, if you get a low, and if I get a new filter in to review, I'll go to an oscillator I know really well and an envelope that I know I can do everything I'm going to want to do, and just sit and rinse that filter for a couple of evenings. And then you kind of feel like you know it. You've kind of done everything to it, and it feels familiar then. It's not just kind of plonked in the middle of this big system where I'll occasionally patch into it and I'm not 100% how it's going to react. I think it's a definite much better way to work.
Absolutely agree.
The red box has grown, so you can see it behind you, into a slightly bigger system. What's brought that along? Is it a case of wanting to kind of live with a red box kind of patching style for a while, or is this just kind of now the bigger home system?
This is now my main system. So there's the red box and the blue box, 2 rows, 2.5 rows. And I've always had this kind of 5-row system with a skiff and a suitcase. And I just did a big purge over the summer of modules that I felt like were fine and they were good, but I hadn't had the chance to really live, to the point we were making earlier. I didn't get a chance to really live with these modules in a way that I did with the red box and the blue box. So all of a sudden I'm like, I now know what I want for the next stage of my musical expression in terms of timbres and voices. But what I missed about this was I have a whole row of like comparators and logic and all those other things that when I want a generative line going along something I've sequenced, going along with something I'm playing live, doing that in a small system is really tough because you don't have the room. So, and a lot more channels of mixing, a lot more channels of VCAs, a whole lot more VCAs now. So it's not super dissimilar in terms of output, but now there's an actual complex oscillator in there, the random sampling, stuff like that. So it's more of an outgrowth. But the sequencer skiff has been with me for a long time. This is the original Renee that we've been talking about a few times. Got the multi-stage in there now. Got a planar and a pressure points. So
yeah. So having done this red box release, as I said, December 8th, this is coming out. Links in the description and all that kind of stuff for people asking. Does that bigger system still feel like a small system? Because the majority of it is this red box that you've kind of lived with, got really familiar with, created the release. I imagine adding new modules in or patching into the skiff still feels very familiar because it hasn't been a pull the red box apart, spread it up a big case like this around everything else, where you kind of lose that focus. Does it still feel quite focused? Even though
it does. I mean, one of the things that I learned getting an art degree was just because you can doesn't mean you should. So having a system with more integrated options still doesn't mean that I can't patch this exactly like a 2-row system. And I often do. But also for performance, now I could actually patch up several tracks or movements in a larger piece, which is a lot harder to do in a really, really small system. So for me, it's just a matter of, it's the red box transplanted with some more options that in a given patch I may not even use. But the next patch, I may not use the voltage multi-stage at all. I might choose to use a different method of sequencing. And having those options is kind of nice.
That's interesting to kind of correlate the size of the system with the, second track or almost with time. I remember speaking to Richard Devine quite some time ago about this in an interview, again on this YouTube channel, on my channel, that I think he did put a kind of time on it. It's approximate, obviously, but that he could do 30 to 45 minutes on 6U would kind of be, for his style and his patching, he's about limit, but going to 12U would kind of buy him an hour to an hour and a half, potentially. And that comes up quite a lot in conversation, both on content I'm making and privately or just Facebook chats and things, to perform this stuff, because you do perform as well. It's not just a case of these recorded releases. How do you move from one thing to the next and then have, say, a third thing queued up? Is that what's your approach for performing that way? Is it a case of having a big enough system to do so, or do you do a kind of A and a B and repatch A while B is playing, or how do you work that?
That's a great question, and it's so variable. It's a little hard to find commonalities, but I think usually what ends up happening is I'll rehearse the heck out of it, so I'll know a general flow, and there will be probably at most 2 totally pre-baked kind of structures or lines, and then everything else is improvised around it. But the way I like to perform is I always like to kind of come back to a key motif or two throughout the whole thing. So, maybe the bottom row of the voltage multistage might be like, that doesn't get sacrificed. That'll always stay the same. But then, the upper rows for improvisation, and then I've got, a generative line or two going where it's I'm just tweaking CV, and, kind of like a Tony Child surgeon does. It's like he'll just sit there live and just mess with the Turing machine and then just stop when he gets something. And the intervening, getting to that point might be a little chaotic, but if you're a surgeon, you got the 4 on the floor behind you and people don't care and it sounds great. And I think that kind of live, for me, doing live without any sort of safety net in terms of a melodic anchor or a rhythmic anchor is pretty stressy. But so that's kind of my approach.
I'm just having recently got we're on about small systems, so this is going to make me look stupid, but another 24U of potential case space. With I should mention these actually, the Glasgow makes some noise. I think I can reach one of them. Here's that Warm Star Bends, by the way. My room's a little bit of a mess, so reaching stuff's a bit of a pain. This Glasgow makes some noise. 12U slipper case, I think he calls it. This was put together to do a specific demo of some Metasonic stuff that's coming up. So this isn't my kind of rig, but this and a Ross Lamond 12U case have been kind of recent acquisitions. I want to put 2 kind of live rigs together. I'm just playing around with that idea. I know Myla Melodies and Ebsidic, who was VCO ADSR, Phil Bilsby. Phil Bilsby spoke about it before. He did a performance at Cymru Beats, and I think Myla Melodies has referenced and quoted this in a recent video if people want to kind of backtrack down content that he didn't like, and he was using the Turing machine and it wasn't giving him content. He said, so you might get to this kind of magic moment and effectively all the bit beforehand might be total rubbish, which was kind of Phil's take on it. And I know Alex, Myla Melodies, was performing that way as the first few sort of performances and approaches to his system that he did, and has then been tweaking it away from that to kind of be a bit more intentful in his sequencing. But I'm kind of torn between the 2 at the minute, and I'm playing around with Tuesday from This Is Not Rocket Science, which is kind of like a more algorithmic Turing machine on steroids, because it gives you a stepped velocity output, which is really cool for modulating wave shape and folding and all sorts of stuff, the gate and the note. But you can have 1, 2, 4 or 8 bar sequences at the push of a button, but they will expand out. So you can sit in a looping bar and then just hit the button, and then you get 2 bars where the first bar is the same, but you've got an algorithmically similar sequence in the second. Really amazing. Again, there's a video of the module Tuesday on my channel, so you can see this. You can move in and out of different keys. You can influence how busy the pattern is. It's very much like Mutable Instruments grids for melodies as opposed to beats.
Ooh.
It's really, really cool, really inspirational. But there is that thing in the back of my mind, having spoke to Phil, as I said, VCO ADSR now, Ebsidic, if I'm saying that right, and Alex Myla Melodies. Maybe you'd go out and it would be 15 minutes of just waffle where you try and get to, this is cool, and then go. So it's trying to find this match of flying by the kind of seat of your pants of no pre-arranged material and some arranged material for sequencing. I don't think I've quite cracked it yet.
Yeah, that's tricky. I think for me, like some people solve that through queuing, right? Like they'll run a Rosie or they'll, or a WMD performance filter, and they'll throw that stuff on a Q mix and check it out in the headphones before they actually unleash it on the audience. My solve for that primarily is when I do stuff like that, it's always running through a quantizer. And so even if it's a little noodly until I lock in on something that's a little less all over the place, at least it's not atonal, and it will go it'll go less noticed if it's not quite right.
Yeah, I think that's why I'm still leaning on this idea of Tuesday, because I can set it to be a specific key. There's an X and a Y position to kind of scan through parameters within this. Each algorithm slightly different in terms of what the X and Y does, but there's effectively a density control as well. So that feels like a real safety net that I could, if there's drums going or other textures, as long as I'm in tune, I could start with barely any notes in a bar or 2 or 4 bars. And that's got to be safe. In my mind, it's like, well, just creeping in with a note or 2 has to be fine. It's not like the Turing machine that each clock step will just churn. It's a bit more structured than that. So I think Tuesday from This Is Not Rocket Science could be maybe offset against a small quantized sequencer would be potentially the way to go.
Yeah.
I've had some fun with that, actually, creating a dual sequencer, just adding a 2 HP tune quantizer.
Oh my God, I love those things.
And taking the velocity output into tune and just setting them to the same key. But as you said, with a bit of attenuation, because the velocity can be 5 octaves worth of information. It's too much.
Yeah,
but
totally.
Because the velocity is always related to the pitch and the gate information on the main sort of 2 outputs, it will all cascade around each other. The busier I make that pattern, the more changes in velocity there's going to be. Sometimes the notes on Tuesday will slide depending on algorithm. The velocity won't. So something might step as something else slides. It can feel really organic and kind of nice, cool 2-way kind of voice system. Especially if you offset one up an octave as well. Something like an ALM Beast chalkboard. Get one up out of the way above the other, like a bass player and a guitar player or something. You're not stepping on each other's feet too much for notes.
Totally. And the other trick I often use, I have two 2 HP tunes, two HP tunes in this system, and what I often will find myself doing is I have a variegate as well, and I will use that to determine density of notes. So, like I've had a lot of success decoupling melodic sequencing from gate sequencing and using completely different modules to do that. That can be really, really fun.
Yeah, that's a big thing. Again, something that Myla Melodies touches on. And a way that Phil Blue Wolf 7, I know we're throwing lots of stuff at people to check out. Some of Blue Wolf 7's performances are just stunning on Modular as well. Really amazing work. Phil, if you're watching, say something daft in the comments. If not, someone else go say something daft to Phil and don't tell him why. But it just, this idea of just decoupling all the information, having, I don't know, Euclidean pattern generator or random gates mixed with a steady clock, hitting your envelopes or low pass gates, and then the pitch information just staying maybe in a small repetitive thing. It's something I've been doing with a couple of guys in Skype tutorials, actually. I've been running this kind of Skype tutorial thing for a while, and a lot of people come and say, I want to get more out of my sequencer, and that's usually my first thing that I'll go to is, well, let's clock the sequencer, maybe from like a Pamela's New Workout or something, but let's forget about that clock in terms of the rest of the information that you're going to use for that voice. It's really cool that doing that sort of thing. A Euclidean circles is really nice and performative for that kind of thing as well. So to kind of wrap up, it's been a good 2 hours, and much like with Chris, there's definitely stuff we've not talked about, questions in the chat. Hello again to everyone in the chat. Thanks for all the comments so far. There's definitely stuff that we could probably come back and touch on in a few months, but I'd like to talk about you dipping your kind of toes into the world of Buchla. What are your kind of thoughts on that so far?
I'll keep it really short. I actually have a very small, since we're talking about small systems, I have a very small Buchla system, 6 spaces, 2 rows. So it's basically a music easel and 4 modules. So it's got like a hybrid Buchla 200 series. And that was just me trying to explore, like, okay, well, built, 2 or 3 eurorack systems based on Buchla, but it's not matching what I'm hearing other people accomplish with an actual Buchla. And so let's give it a shot. And so what I'm finding is, especially the easel, or even just the top half of the easel, which is called a 208 module. These designs are about as old as I am, and they're funky. There's crossbleed. There's instability all over the place. And I think what I've realized is that it isn't just one thing. It's the whole package. It's the fact that everything's sliders on the 208 anyway.
Yeah.
The oscillators just sound raw and organic, and they do warble, and they're tuning drifts. And the pulsar, which is like a trigger or a clock in the 208, will also manifest itself in the audio signal just a little bit. And all of these things just kind of add up to make it super, everyone uses the word organic and alive. And I think that's just because of the amount of crosstalk in the circuits, actually. But the one thing that freaks me out about the Buchla system is that now that I own one, I totally understand the bleep and bloop style of music making, because everything it creates is super euphonic. And when you work with it, like, you and I have been talking a lot about keys and melody and all this stuff. You get atonal with it, and it just still sounds kind of great. And it's, the psychological term is autotelic. Like, the making of the sound is as rich an experience as listening to the sounds that it makes as a listener later on. Yeah. And so, Don nailed it. He really nailed it. But they're funky, and they have, because of the architecture he's set up, where audio and CV are completely separate. You can't really functionally mix it unless there's a couple of workarounds, but not that many. The kinds of sequencers that are available for it is pretty limiting. But I'm not a purist, so I have one of my modules is called a Buchla Blade, which is a eurorack carrier, and it's got a qubit octone in it. Yeah. So I totally have a sequencer that I know and love, and it's really intuitive. And then I can also have it clocked by this thing, and all I can tell you is just wait.
Yeah, cool. We'll kind of wrap it up there, but let's just leave it because there's a slight, it's usually about 20-30 second delay between what me and Nathan are watching and the actual YouTube live stream. Let's just leave it for kind of 5 minutes before we wrap up, and if people want to fire any last minute questions in before we close out, we will do. So have you any performances coming up soon? I mean, if feasibly I can't get out on a flight, I'd love to come and see it, and possibly have you at a UK event at some point, presuming that we can make that work. But where's best for people to find you? Have you got any live gigs coming up?
The website noisejockey.net or music.noisejockey.net is where I post all news and stuff coming up from me. I've actually been on a kind of taking a sabbatical, kind of a break from playing live, mostly because I've been working on a film score. So that's been taking up a lot of time, and that's kind of had to be my primary focus. But in 2018, I could see playing a couple of times. I'd love to get back over to the UK. Love it over there. So no plans for a show yet, but I would say February is probably when you should perk your ears up again. There might be some news by then.
Yeah. And for anyone else wondering where to find Nathan, I'll put several links in the video description. So even if you've watched it, come back tomorrow when this is sat live on YouTube. Hit that video description. It's strange. So many people, complete side topic and maybe mini rant, ignore that video description that I'm sure I could write kind of 2 lines down, put the word blue in the comments and I'll give you my whole eurorack system. And like five people out of 1,000 that watch would do it. There's usually most of the questions are answered, certainly with my content and a lot of other content. And I'm really guilty of watching something from someone and just going, tell me everything, kind of hitting the keyboard beforehand. But just take a step back. There's usually quite a lot, you know, patch notes, descriptions on videos. I will put links to all this stuff in there. And if
cool.
I don't,
and I'll monitor those comments as well. So if people have questions for me, that can be a nice centralized place to give answers as well.
Yeah, I should say that again. Mark Zeno in the chat, great friend and person to be talking to about all sorts of things. He did point out after the Chris Meyer show actually that we should offer a kind of place to ask questions after the show. No doubt people will watch this, go away, think about it, maybe tune into a little bit again. If anyone wants to ask questions, I'll reply to everything in the YouTube comments, and as Nathan just said, he will as well. So feel free to digest this stuff and come back. If anyone wants some serious brownie points and you want to try and timing index the things we talk about, because Chris Meyer joked about doing that himself. He said, you'll see how bored I am as to whether I watch the whole thing back and I give you a timing index to put in the video description. If anyone, I know someone does that for Sonic Talk every week. I think someone else puts in a kind of, you know, at 4 minutes 30 you started talking about this, at 12 minutes whatever you started talking about this. Really handy, but I'll be honest, I'm not going to have time to do that.
You need an intern, man, I'm telling you.
Yeah, if anyone wants to intern, yeah, I could do with that, to be honest. I'm just scanning through the chat, not particularly seeing any specific questions to end on. Thanks to everyone again that's watched. Tom Evans there has said, where do random modules usually exist in your patches and compositions? It's a good question.
Thanks, Tom. It is a good question. I think it breaks down into two categories. One is driving pitch, one is driving modulation. Not the sexiest of answers, but in the Redbox album, I'm using the qubit nanorand as a random source. And now I've switched over to the Verbos random sampling. But I've also owned a Wogglebug since forever. And so I find that running part of its output through a quantizer has been really nice. But I like, as long as I can CV control the randomness, it's much better. So you really need randomness that you can control. It almost always then also goes through an attenuator and then hits the quantizer. But you know, obviously with modulation, that's really nice too. I'm a kind of a clock Nazi. I'm just super about always having a bass clock, no matter what. But it always sounds richer when there's one or two things that are absolutely not synced.
Yeah.
So so that's what I wound up using. Usually highly attenuated random for. So.
Yeah, a nice thing for that as well is having slew generators to hand. If you're taking unsynced stepped modulation, I don't want like a note to hold and out of time partway through that note, a filter or a folder kick up or down. But if there's got attenuation and some sort of slew and you can blur those edges, you can kind of get away with anything if you slew it and attenuate it enough. And doing it, it's like humanization as well, I think.
Oh, totally. You'll never take my maths away just for that very purpose.
I've lost it now in the chat. I'll bring it back up though. I remember the question. If we see it on screen, great. If not, doesn't matter. Someone asked, which module is it that uses the Fibonacci sequence? Is that something from Qubit? The Cylon Labs Chaos Divider will do Fibonacci-based dividing. So a 1, 3, 5, 8. The Fibonacci sequence adds the previous two numbers together. So when you're on 3 and 5, you get 8, and then the 5 and 8 just keeps adding up as it goes. That will do it. I don't know of anything from Qubit that uses the Fibonacci sequence. Do you?
I don't. My knowledge of maths ends at maths.
Yeah, I can't. The manual from Qubit for things like chance and their other modules is great. You'll find it in there. Even for those that don't like reading manuals, just go have a quick look through that stuff.
quick thought, since you just mentioned manuals, I think a lot of people have, shall we say, strong opinions about the flowery prose used to promote the Mannequins modules, since we've talked a lot about those earlier. And I do just want to make sure everyone knows that I don't disagree, but there are actual manuals that do not share the same marketing copy as his website. And the manuals are still a little poetic, but they're actually really super clear. And they're actually pretty easy to follow. So don't let the flowery prose of whimsical raps marketing scare you off. The manuals that come with the modules are actually pretty great.
Yeah. I'll take this as the last question because it's been posed as the last question. Matt Marcy, or Markey, sorry if I've said that wrong, Matt, asks, cruel last question, what are your free desert island modules? Do you want to go first, or do you want me to take that?
That's totally not fair. Well, you gave me the option. I'm going to let you go first.
Okay. DLD from 4MS. It is still... It's quick. As soon as I saw that, I was like, 4MS DLD. I absolutely love that thing as a looper and a delay, or both, or a hybrid in and out of both. The fact that I can heavily CV delay time and not get that pitch bending effect you get on analog delays, or even a lot of digital delays that model that behavior. It's really cool. And it's like 3 minutes aside of delay on that thing. You know, you could record a patch, have it loop, manipulate its time, and that in itself would effectively buy you kind of track 2 in a live performance, if you like. Really nice piece of kit. The other two, I don't know. I guess things, the kind of less sexy stuff like Pamela's new workout, or an octa controller from Abstract Data, or like the ultra random analog from Steady State Fits, something that gives me a lot of modulation and control. It's a cruel question, Matt. I really don't know. But I guess my 3 module challenge thing that I did, I'm toying with the idea of an album with this, but I'm fighting against it. I'm kind of bucking up against this restriction, as you said. The DLD, some sort of heavy CV and clock hub source, like Pamela's new workout or an octa controller, and then some sort of complex, complete voice. For me, it was Rings, Ultra Random Analog, and DLD for the 3 module challenge. But I don't know. I guess the E370 from Synthesis Technology, when that comes, because that's going to be 4 voices of ridiculousness from Paul.
It's almost like cheating, though, man. Come on.
Yeah, it is. I want to say the Harmonaigñ from Instruo, but I need more than another 2 modules to get anywhere near what that thing offers. I don't know. I'm going to back out of that and say DLD is straight away came into mind. I've kind of got like best in class, if you like, which I hate to use the term best because it's not really the best in any kind of situation. You may feel entirely different. Half the people watching may feel different. That's a kind of easier question to ask, like favourite mixer or favourite oscillator, and that changes over time as well. No, I'm going to back out. I'll say DLD, and I don't know. Can you be any clearer than I can?
I would need well, maybe. How's that for vague? So I would actually also say I would have 2 ways to answer that. I would say DLD, Pamela's new workout, and either a Mangrove or the harmonic oscillator. And the reason I choose those last 2 is that they have VCAs built in. Yeah,
that's the killer. See, I could have gone, again, Pamela's or octa controller or ultra random in a DLD.
Yeah.
Like an E352, amazing oscillator, wavetable oscillator from Synthesis Technology. Again, videos on my channel for nearly all of what I'm talking about, but it doesn't have a VCA on it. It pairs really well with the Optomix, but then E352 Optomix DLD becomes an entirely physically controlled system.
Totally. And like I'm good with drones, and so like I'd be fine. And I think that there's something very almost kind of sitar-like about the tones that come out of the harmonic oscillator, for obvious reasons. And so for me, I would say, and like a luscious, gorgeous effect. And that would either be for me, clouds or DLD, as cliche as those are, they do actually sound pretty great. And if that's all I had to use, I'd actually be okay. Pamel's new workout because it gives you clock and LFOs and envelopes.
Yeah.
And, with enough Euclidean sequencing and random skipping, it can be incredibly rich. And so I'd say DLD, harmonic oscillator, really, and PAMs.
You could go, just a thought, and this is another hour coming up, so I'll shut up in a minute.
Yes.
If you went ZDSP, although you could do it on the DLD as well, if you've got the mix-up full but you CV delay feed, they effectively act as VCAs on the input, so we can...
Huh.
So yeah, that would work. Or if you go ZDSP into like the Halls of Valhalla, which is gorgeous, you could not go into the inputs and go to the feedback ins because you've got CV over feedback level.
Ooh.
So again, you've effectively two input VCAs as well. Yeah. There's stuff I'm gonna have to go and try this.
Oh, my next question is, which island is this?
Yeah. Where
Very
are we
important.
Where are we all
And are there
going
my
with and where are we all going together? That would be more interesting.
Because if you get enough people on this island with 3 modules.
Yeah. It's come up in the chat. No love for the DPO. I don't have a DPO. In terms of complex oscillators, I've gone for Feedback's 259 oscillators and the expander shaper that makes the whole complex oscillator sound different to the DPO, sounds different to the Sputnik, closer to the Verbos in terms of the kind of warmth and thickness that has. That's slightly different. I think the Sputnik and the DPO are a little bit more angular, which are great at different things.
Yep. I used to own a DPO, and I actually really struggled with keeping that thing in tune and and the octave range across which I could keep it in tune. So I wound up selling it, but it gets to crazier sonic territory than the complex oscillator from Verbos for sure. And of course, we're all friends with James Sigler, and he uses it that's his main thing. And he makes magic with that thing. So it is a great module. Just wasn't great for me.
Yeah. James's stuff. And in terms of musical output videos, just talking to the guy, James really cool. So I'll put links to everything that we've spoken about, and links to Nathan's music, to Sterile Flower and his website. One last thing, because someone's just asked, did the last live video go up? Yes, it did. One thing worth doing, a little bit of a labour of love. I really do take care of trying to keep my homepage organised and playlist on YouTube. I don't think anyone looks at it because I don't for most other people. I click the subscriptions, I see what's new and consume content however I do. It's worth just having a nosy every now and then on that homepage because I do go and edit the layout. I'll pull up an old playlist that you might have missed things from. That first rig rundown video's there. This one that we can still see is live will be there. Everything's kind of organised. If you feel you might have missed anything that I've said anywhere, come and have a nosy around. There's usually plenty of content going up. Yeah, well, thank you very much for your time, Nathan. Really appreciated. And much like the show with Chris, we could probably revisit it in a few months, see how the system's changed, touch on things. Any questions anyone wants to ask in the comments, please do. We'll both be watching those. Any kind of closing message or anything?
Well, I want to thank you, Ben. It's an honor to be on the show. You do a lot for the community, and I think we're all really, really appreciative of that. And I hope people found this interesting. And I'm pretty easy to find online, and people can always feel free to ask me any questions they have. Oh, last thing, free download. So
yes.
there's going to be a track made with the Blue Box just in the last couple of days. It's the first composition with the Blue Box since the release. And it's a rather epic 8.5-minute track that is right now available on SoundCloud, and you can download it, and hopefully you dig it.
Yeah, I'd really encourage people to actually go get the music for this. Listen to us talking about all this, but just go and listen to the music and forget about the modules for a minute. And hopefully come back with some comments on that as well. I'll link that in the description. Big cheers to everyone in the chat room doing these live. really cool for that reason. It's nice to see people talking to each other as a kind of side conversation as well. And I hope everyone just keeps talking to each other. The whole kind of community aspect to this is great.
Absolutely.
Yeah, cool. Right, well, again, thank you very much, and I'll see everyone soon. Cheers.
Bye-bye.